Hispanic Americans and Latino Americans are American citizens who are descendants of the peoples of the Spanish-speaking countries of Latin America and the Iberian Peninsula. More generally, it includes all persons in the United States who self-identify as Hispanic or Latino, whether of full or partial ancestry. For the U.S. Census in 2010 American Community Survey, people counted as Hispanic or Latino are those who identify as one of the specific Hispanic or Latino categories listed on the census or questionnaire, as well as those who indicate that they are other Spanish, Hispanic, or Latino. The national origins classified as Hispanic or Latino by the U.S. Census Bureau are the following: Spain, Argentina, Cuba, Colombia, Puerto Rico, Mexico, Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Panama, El Salvador, Bolivia, Chile, Ecuador, Paraguay, Peru, Uruguay, and Venezuela. Other U.S. government agencies have slightly different definitions of the term, including Brazilians and other Portuguese-speaking groups. The Census Bureau uses the terms Hispanic and Latino interchangeably. Origin can be viewed as the ancestry, nationality group, lineage, or country of birth of the person's parents or ancestors before their arrival in the United States. People who identify as Spanish, Hispanic, or Latino may be of any race, as the only specifically designated category of ethnicity in the United States. Hispanics form a pan-ethnicity incorporating a diversity of interrelated cultural and linguistic heritages. Most Hispanic Americans are of Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Salvadoran, Dominican, Guatemalan, or Colombian origin. The predominant Hispanic origin varies widely across the country. Hispanic Americans are the second fastest growing ethnic group in the United States after Asian Americans. As of 2014, Hispanics constitute 17.37% of the United States population, or 55.3 million people. Hispanic Latinos overall are the second largest ethnic group in the United States, after non-Hispanic whites. Hispanics have occupied territory of the present-day United States continuously since the 16th century founding by the Spanish of St. Augustine, Florida. After Native Americans, Hispanics are the oldest ethnic group to inhabit much of what is today the United States. Many have Native American ancestry. Spain colonized large areas of what is today the American Southwest and West Coast, including present-day California, New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas, all of which were under the Republic of Mexico after its independence in the 19th century and until the end of the Mexican-American War. Terminology: the terms Hispanic and Latino refer to an ethnicity. People of this group may be of any race. Hispanic people may share some commonalities in the language, culture, history, and heritage. According to the Smithsonian Institution, the term Latino includes peoples with Portuguese roots, such as Brazilians, as well as those of Spanish language origin. A Hispanic or Latino can be of any race. In the United States, many Hispanics and Latinos are mestizos. Others are of predominantly European or American Indian ancestry. Many Hispanics and Latinos from the Caribbean and other countries where slavery was widespread may also have some African ancestry. The difference between the terms Hispanic and Latino is confusing to some. The U.S. Census Bureau equates the two terms and defines them as referring to anyone from Spain and the Spanish-speaking countries of the Americas. The term Latino has developed a number of definitions. One definition of Latino is a Latin male in the United States. This is the oldest and the original definition used in the United States, first used in 1946. This definition encompasses both Spanish speakers from Europe and the Americas. Under this definition, immigrants from Spain and immigrants from Latin America are both Latino. This definition is consistent with the 21st century usage by the U.S. Census Bureau and OMB, as the two agencies use both terms Hispanic and Latino interchangeably. A later definition of Latino is that it possibly could be a condensed form of the term Latino Americano, the Spanish word for Latin American, or someone who comes from Latin America. Under this definition, a Mexican American, a Puerto Rican, for example, is both a Hispanic and a Latino. A Brazilian American is also a Latino by this definition, which would include those of Portuguese-speaking origin from Latin America. An immigrant from Spain would be classified as Hispanic but not Latino by this definition. Filipinos and Guamanians are not considered Hispanic, although some may speak Spanish, because Spanish is not the official language of either of the countries. The Philippines and Guam were colonies of Spain for hundreds of years, but there were not as many colonists in these areas as in the Americas. After the Spanish-American War and United States rule for decades in the Philippines, English became one of the predominant official languages in the country. While the U.S. Census Bureau's definition of Hispanic is limited to Spain and Spanish-speaking Latin America, other government agencies have slightly different definitions of the term. The U.S. Department of Transportation defines Hispanic as persons of Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Dominican, Central or South American, or other Spanish or Portuguese culture or origin, regardless of race. Quote, "This definition has been adopted by the Small Business Administration as well as by many federal, state, and municipal agencies. Unlike the Census Bureau's definition, this clearly includes people with origins in Portuguese-speaking countries. Preference of use between the terms among Hispanics and Latinos in the United States often depends on where persons reside. Those in the eastern United States tend to prefer the term Hispanic, whereas those in the West tend to prefer Latino. Both terms refer to ethnicity, as a person of Latino or Hispanic origin can be of any race. In Spanish, Latina is used for persons of feminine gender, Latino is used for those of masculine gender, or by default. For example, a group of mixed or unknown gender would be referred to as Latinos. The neologisms Latinx and Latinate were coined as a gender-neutral alternative to this traditional usage. The X functions as a variable encompassing those who identify as male, female, or non-binary. It has not been widely adopted. History: 16th and 17th centuries. Hispanic Latinos have been settled continuously in the territory of the United States since the 16th century, earlier than any other colonial group of European origin. Spanish explorers were pioneers in the territory of the present-day United States. The first confirmed European landing in the continental U.S. was by Juan Ponce de Leon, who landed in 1513 at a lush shore he christened La Florida. Within 3 decades of Ponce de Leon's landing, the Spanish became the first Europeans to reach the Appalachian Mountains, the Mississippi River, the Grand Canyon and the Great Plains. Spanish ships sailed along the east coast, penetrating to present-day Bangor, Maine, and up the Pacific coast as far as Oregon. From 1528 to 1536, Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca and 3 fellows, from a Spanish expedition that founded, journeyed from Florida to the Gulf of California, 267 years before the Lewis and Clark expedition. In 1540, Hernando de Soto undertook an extensive exploration of the present U.S. That same year Francisco Vázquez de Coronado led 2,000 Spaniards and Mexican Indians across today's Arizona-Mexico border and traveled as far as central Kansas, close to the exact geographic center of what is now the continental United States. Other Spanish explorers of the U.S. territory include, among others, Lucas Vázquez de Ayllón, Panfilo de Narváez, Sebastián Vizcaíno, Gaspar de Portola, Pedro Menéndez de Avilés, Álvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, Tristan de Luna y Arellano, and Juan de Onate, are non-Spanish explorers working for the Spanish crown, such as Juan Rodríguez Cabrillo. In all, Spaniards probed half of today's lower 48 states before the first English colonization effort in 1585 at Roanoke Island off the east coast. In 1565, the Spanish created the first permanent European settlement in the continental United States, at St. Augustine, Florida. Santa Fe, New Mexico was founded before Jamestown, Virginia, and the New England Plymouth colony. Spanish missionaries and colonists founded settlements in El Paso, San Antonio, Tucson, San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, to name a few. 18th and 19th centuries. As late as 1783, at the end of the American Revolutionary War, Spain held claim to roughly half the territory of today's continental United States. From 1819 to 1848, the United States increased its area by roughly a third at Spanish and Mexican expense, acquiring three of what are today's four most populous states: California, Texas, and Florida. 20th and 21st centuries. During the 20th and 21st centuries, Hispanic and Latino immigration to the U.S. increased markedly following changes to the immigration law in 1965. Hispanic and Latino contributions in the history and present of the United States are addressed in more detail below. To recognize the current and historic contributions of Hispanic and Latino Americans, on September 17, 1968, President Lyndon B. Johnson designated a week in mid-September as National Hispanic Heritage Week with Congress's authorization. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan extended the observance to a month designated Hispanic Heritage Month. Demographics. As of 2011, Hispanics accounted for 16.7% of the national population, or around 52 million people. The Hispanic growth rate over the April 1, 2000 to July 1, 2007 period was 28.7%, about 4 times the rate of the nation's total population. The growth rate from July 1, 2005 to July 1, 2006 alone was 3.4%, about 3.5 times the rate of the nation's total population. Based on the 2010 census, Hispanics are now the largest minority group in 191 out of 366 metropolitan areas in the U.S. The projected Hispanic population of the United States for July 1, 2050 is 132.8 million people, or 30.2% of the nation's total projected population on that date. Geographic distribution: U.S. metropolitan areas with over 1 million Hispanics, states and territories with the highest proportion of Hispanics of the nation's total Hispanic-Latino population. 49% live in California or Texas. Over half of the Hispanic-Latino population is concentrated in the Southwest region, mostly composed of Mexican Americans. California and Texas have some of the largest populations of Mexicans and Central American Latinos in the United States. The Northeast region is dominated by Puerto Rican Americans and Dominican Americans, having the highest concentrations of both in the country. In the Mid-Atlantic region, centered on the D.C. metro area, Salvadoran Americans are the largest of Hispanic groups. Florida is dominated by Cuban Americans and Puerto Ricans. In both the Great Lakes states and the South Atlantic states, Mexicans and Puerto Ricans dominate. Mexicans dominate in the rest of the country, including the western United States, south-central United States and Great Plains states. National origin. As of 2007, some 64% of the nation's Hispanic population are of Mexican origin. Another 9% are of Puerto Rican origin, with about 3% each of Cuban, Salvadoran and Dominican origins. The remainder are of other Central American or South American origin, or of origin directly from Spain. 60.2% of all Hispanic and Latino Americans were born in the United States. There are few recent immigrants directly from Spain. In the 2000 census, 299,948 Americans, of whom 83% were native-born, specifically reported their ancestry as Spaniard. However, a larger amount of people in the 2000 census, some 2,187,144 Americans, reported Spanish as their ancestry, whether directly from Spain or not. In northern New Mexico and southern Colorado, there is a large portion of Hispanics who trace their ancestry to Spanish settlers of the late 16th century through the 17th century. People from this background often self-identify as Hispanos, Spanish, or Hispanic. Many of these settlers also intermarried with local Amerindians, creating a mestizo population. Likewise, southern Louisiana is home to communities of people of Canary Islands descent, known as Islenos, in addition to other people of Spanish ancestry. Chicanos, Californios, Nuevo Mexicanos and Tejanos are Americans of Spanish and Mexican descent. Chicanos live in the Southwest, Nuevo Mexicanos in New Mexico, and Tejanos in Texas. Nuevo Mexicanos and Tejanos are distinct cultures with their own cuisines, dialects and musical traditions. The term Chicano became popular amongst Mexican Americans in the 1960s during the Chicano nationalism and Chicano movement, and is today seen as an ethnic and cultural identity by some. Political activist C.E. Acute Sar Chavez and novelist José Antonio Villarreal are famous Chicanos. New Yorkans are Americans of Puerto Rican descent from the New York City area. There are close to 2 million New Yorkans in the U.S. Famous New Yorkans include U.S. Supreme Court Judge Sonia Sotomayor and singer Jennifer Lopez. Race. Hispanic or Latino origin is independent of race and is termed ethnicity by the United States Census Bureau. According to the 2007 American Community Survey, 42% of Hispanic and Latinos were white. The largest numbers of white Hispanics come from within the Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban and Colombian communities. The largest numbers of black Hispanics are from the Spanish Caribbean islands, including the Cuban, Dominican, Panamanian, and Puerto Rican communities. A significant portion of the Hispanic and Latino population self-identifies as mestizo, particularly the Mexican and Central American community. Mestizo is not a racial category in the U.S. Census, but signifies someone who has both European and American Indian ancestry. According to the 2010 United States Census, 36.7% of Hispanic Latino Americans identify as some other race. As these Hispanic Latinos may feel, the U.S. Census does not describe their European or American Indian ancestry as they understand it to be. Half of the Hispanic Latino population in the United States self-identifies as white. Most of the multiracial population in the Mexican, Salvadoran, and Guatemalan communities are of European and Native American ancestry, while most of the multiracial population in the Puerto Rican, Dominican, and Cuban communities are of European and African ancestry. Hispanic and Latinos are racially diverse, although different races are usually the majority of each Hispanic group. For example, of major U.S. Hispanic groups with populations of over 1 million in northern Mexico, most people are white or biracial, having white Native American ancestry, while in southern Mexico, the majority are Native American or of Native American and European ancestry. In Guatemala, Native American and biracial people of Native American and European descent make the majority, while in El Salvador, whites and biracial people of Native American, European descent are the majority. In the Dominican Republic, the population are largely made up of people with intermixed ancestries, in which there are even levels of African and European ancestry, with smaller numbers of whites and blacks as well. In Puerto Rico, people with European ancestry are the majority. There are also populations of predominantly of African descent as well as populations of American Indian descent as well as those with intermixed ancestries. Cubans are mostly of white Latin American ancestry, however there are also populations of blacks and multiracials as well. The race and culture of each Hispanic, Latino country in the United States diaspora differs by history and geography. Mexicans represent the bulk of the U.S. Hispanic, Latino population, and most Mexican Americans that migrate to the United States are of Native American and white descent, which causes many non-Hispanics to equate being Hispanic with being of Mestizo or Native American ancestry. Official sources report the racial makeup of these Hispanic subgroups as follows: Argentina, Uruguay, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and Chile, having the highest percentage of Hispanics self-identifying as white in the respective countries. As a result of the racial diversity, Hispanics form an ethnicity sharing a language and cultural heritage rather than a race. The phenomenon of biracial people who are predominantly of European descent identifying as white is not limited to Hispanics or Spanish speakers, but is also common among English speakers as well. Researchers found that most white Americans with less than 28% African American ancestry say they are white. Above that threshold, people tended to describe themselves as African American.